Okay, so this is 2D LIHEAP state tribal agreements, building effective relationships. And we're going to have a lot of discussion about how to get that done. In this session, we'll discuss funding allocation for tribal LIHEAP programs, the default method versus common methods used in state tribal agreements. How many of you know what the default method is for state for tribal funding amounts? Peter's going to give you all the information you need to know, and why you might want to do that or not. What a state tribal agreement is and what they're for, and real life examples of how important program coordination issues are addressed through state tribal agreements and beyond. So Peter Edelman from the Office of Community Services is going to talk about funding allocation for tribal programs, the default versus what can be done through a state tribal agreement. Melissa Torgerson from Verve is going to talk about the basics of what you should have in your agreements. Lori Walking Eagle from Rosebud Sioux Tribe and David Gall from South Dakota. I guess saying that Rosebud Sioux Tribe is in South Dakota. They're going to talk about the relationship between the tribe and the state in South Dakota. Jacob Timmons, Pamela Murphy, and Jesse Parr are going to talk about the relations in the tribal agreements, state tribal agreements in Alaska. And with that, we will move to go to Peter, who will give you information on the funding allocation for tribal programs, default formula versus state tribal agreements.
Okay, thank you, David. At this time, I'd like to discuss how state tribe agreements. First of all, can everybody hear me? Kind of. All right. Okay. Oh, thanks. Okay, I'd like to go over.
I'll show you which button to push. I couldn't figure out which button to push. This button gets you to the next
down. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, David. All right. So as far as how OCS determines the allocations to state tribe agreements, I will go over the default method that David just mentioned, and I'll raise examples of alternatives that are based on such agreements. This over here shows the default method. It's set by the statute, and it calls for allocating funds to the tribe according to what's called the state's gross allocation. The state's gross allocation is determined by the LIHEAP formula that governs the allocations to all states. And you can learn more about that formula at session 2F, understanding the LIHEAP formula, which will be presented tomorrow. That's Thursday, May 23rd at 10:30 to 11:45. In this case, the tribe's allocation falls in direct proportion to what we'll call here the tribe's household ratio. This ratio derives from the tribe's share of the state's LIHEAP eligible households that are Native American or Alaska Native and that reside on the tribe's reservation or on the adjacent trust lands. To run this method, OCS gets the counts of the tribes and states' households from the Census Bureau in what we call the custom tabulations. It's because they aren't provided more generally to the public. We have to get them. We have to actually purchase them from the Census Bureau. And this is an example of how the default method plays out. These are just hypothetical figures, but they are fairly realistic. So you start off with the state's LIHEAP allocation. The number of AIAN stands for American Indian Alaska Native households, and then the number of eligible state households. And you notice those are both based on ACS data, which is the same thing as the custom tabulations. So from there, you divide the tribe's households by the state's households, get a percentage. In this case, it's roughly 0.081%. And then you multiply that by the state's gross allocation from the formula, and you get the resulting number. It's around 142,000 in this particular scenario. Again, this is hypothetical, even though the numbers aren't round. It's just for illustrative purposes. With what we have here is the ACS data. Again, that's the custom tabulations data. OCS plans to get these tabulations and update them later on this year in time for the 2025 model plans. When we will be sure to check the tabulations to make sure that the tribal numbers show an equitable distribution of funds. So, with the default allocation, there could be somewhat of a problem. As I mentioned, OCS uses the custom tabulations of the ACS data, but there's a chance that this data might not accurately capture all tribe situations, and that it may potentially leave some of them with amounts that are too low. In those cases, we encourage states and tribes to enter into agreements when this problem arises. Now, in this slide, it shows without and with a tri-state agreement, and I want to emphasize the second point on this slide. OCS will prepare the formula using only the relevant provisions of the agreement. So when setting up those provisions, please use precise terminology and avoid any language that doesn't link to the formula. And also, please specify the dates or the years in which these provisions apply. Regarding the third point, these figures serve as the ACS figures serve as the base for the default method. The LIHEAP statute calls for, when an agreement is in place, the LIHEAP statute calls for the amount that's generated by that agreement to deliver more funds to the tribe. But if it doesn't do that, then OCS simply reverts essentially to the default method, and the rest of the agreement remains in place. So, and here we have some examples of the methods that state-tribe agreements may use and have frequently been used. So this is by no means exhaustive. Any method, in fact, is acceptable, provided OCS can turn it into a mathematical formula without having to get numbers from outside the custom tabulations and the agreement itself. And here is a table that illustrates the different methods plus the default method. These are all hypothetical. And in this case, the allocation percentage over on the left-hand column is the same thing as the default ratio that I mentioned on slide 7. Now, in this case, if in the percentage column, that allocation percentage were reduced to 0.02%, then the result of multiplying the allocation percentage and the state's allocation would reduce to less than $50,000. It would be $40,000. That leaves it below the default method of $50,000. So as a result, OCS would use the amount that results from the default method. And as I mentioned, these methods aren't exhaustive. There have been other methods that have been used in the past. Those include percentages, whether they're flat percentages, like in a percentage column, or household count-based percentages, like in the eligible household count column, with either a floor below which the allocation won't go, or with an additional amount. The same thing as combining with the amount column. Now, under a real scenario, OCS would, each time it updates the custom tabulations, would update the tribal household figures in the default scenario, and the state household figures in the default and eligible household count scenarios. Those both come from the custom tabulations. So, to take away, remember that a state and a tribe may use any method that they agree upon, and that OCS can turn into a mathematical formula. And in that agreement document, both parties should spell out that method precisely and specify when the agreement starts and stops. And now let's welcome Melissa Torgerson, who will discuss the basics of state-tribe agreements.
So before we move on, does anyone have questions for Peter about how he does go about calculating this information. He calculates information for the allocation to states, and then he calculates the share of that goes to the individual tribes. You want to challenge him on anything? Go ahead, Brian.
Not a challenging question.
Okay.
So our state has 29 recognized.
Wait, can you bring it in voice? Let's let him. Yeah.
Turn this off by mistake.
So our state has 29 federally recognized tribes. If we do not have the opportunity to meet with all of them prior to you meeting these numbers, is it permissible to send you the agreements that we do have and change just some of the tribes' percentages?
You asked about meeting with only some but not all of your tribes to change the information on your agreements. If it's something that the state and the tribe agree to, then that's fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Let me give, I think, a clearer answer to that. State, OCS does not require that you have a state tribal agreement. If there's no state tribal agreement, they'll use the default amount. If you have an old state tribal agreement, they will continue using that until you update. So in any time you update a state tribal agreement, you should send it to OCS. Don't wait for all 50 of them to be done. Every single time you update one, send it to OCS, and they'll make use of that for the next allocation.
Yeah.
And so we have an agreement that has all the tribes on it. And
one agreement that has everybody, all tribes?
Yes, that is our old, yes, exactly. That's our old agreement. And so going through and getting 29 done by the time he needs the numbers would be the issue. So I just wanted to make sure that
I would say that in that case, what you do is you send, as you edit that state tribal agreement for each individual tribe, you just send that individual. If you haven't updated it for any individual tribe, you leave those alone. Those that you've updated, you send them. As soon as you have that information, you want to get that to Peter, because any amount, any time that he's trying to allocate funds, he wants the latest information for each tribe that has entered into an agreement with you.
And be sure to share it with the tribes, because the tribes will starting with the FY25, we'll be asking tribes to upload copies of their agreements with their plans.
Why wouldn't somebody share the agreement with the tribe? It's their agreement.
Oh yeah, definitely. But
Okay,
in that case, for the tribes who are going to be.
I was surprised at this.
Okay.
Well, no, that's useful information. So go ahead, Erica.
Agreements are, quite old, and the state doesn't have copies, and the tribe doesn't have copies. So, and if an agreement's been signed in the interim and not provided to OCS, we're trying to make sure that we're using the right information and all parties are aware of where they're allocated.
So how many of you are tribal program managers? So what they're saying to you is that the new instructions this year are going to ask you to not just complete your plan, but also upload your agreement, if you have them, correct?
And then to add to that, to your question, I didn't even know that there were state tribal agreements that existed when I became a director in 2018. It wasn't until we had the Region 4 meeting when I met David that we started talking about that, and I had to even look for it, which we didn't even have at the tribe, and David sent me one. So there was one in 1994, I think, in 2014.
If you don't have a copy of your state tribal agreement, reach out to the clearinghouse, reach out to OCS, reach out to your state, and it's very possible someone has a copy of it. And they'll get it to you as soon as they're able.
Yep.
Go ahead. Anything else before we move on to Melissa? Okay, Melissa, tell us what should be in a state tribal agreement. in order to protect the tribe and make sure they have the best information possible.
Good afternoon, way back there. There's a couple of things I want to say before I forget. As you all know, Peter is from OCS. We have some other OCS folks in the room, and Heather Jones asked me to point out that right now the meeting or dialogue with the feds is going on. And so those of you who are having to miss that, they do have open office hours tomorrow, right? And it's on the agenda. So if you are really dying to talk to OCS folks, there is still that opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit about the basics of state-tribe agreements. I learned about my state-tribe agreement when I was cleaning out my predecessor's files at the state, and I found one shoved in the back of a random file and went, what in the world is this? I was one of those states, and the tribes in my state, along with me, that had no idea how old our agreement was, where it was, or even what it should contain. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is the basics and some of the key things that you might put in a state-tribe agreement. Now, this is important for the reason that Peter just talked about. An agreement helps you figure out what it is the tribe really needs and talk with the state, collaborate with the state to figure out how to best serve the tribal population. Now, as Peter implied, sometimes the default values will be low, and we see that regularly. And so this is your opportunity as a tribe to say, we believe that we have more people in the count, we believe we should have more funding, and to negotiate that with your tribe. The other thing that you're going to want to look at is identifying the tribe's service territory. Many of you don't have reservations. You may have trust lands. You may actually not really have a geographic center. You may be across a state. And so identifying the service territory that will be served by the tribe versus that will be served by the state is very important. Preventing duplication of services, facilitating data exchanges, if that's something that you are interested in doing, and then creating a process for resolving disputes. Now, agreements are binding and enforceable. And so as you all were just talking about making sure everyone has copies, in my head, I kept thinking, well, don't they all sign it? I could turn in a random copy without the tribe ever seeing it. It sure seems like a signature line is important. So we're going to add that to the slides if we haven't already. Besides a tribe's LIHEAP allocation, agreements can and should include the duration of the agreement. So this is saying, look, this is only good for a year, at which point we'll renegotiate. If something is, there should be a contingency clause, though, things happen. If it's not renegotiated, this is in, the funding amount should be used until further notice. There needs to be some fairly detailed language. Does it need to be hugely legal? No. And I know that it's intimidating to get an agreement full of legalese. Start by using just plain language. If Peter or someone at OCS gets it and says this doesn't cut mustard, then guess what? We can actually help you rewrite or write certain parts to make sense. A definition of households to be served by tribes is another thing that we're going to focus on, and then the process for avoiding duplicate benefits. So the duration of an agreement can be 1 year, multiple years, or indefinite. As you heard today, and I think it's the most important point, that old crumpled literally typewriter tribal agreement that I pulled out of that file was the most recent one done between that particular tribe and the state that I worked in. And because nothing else had been done since, even though it was old crumply typewriter, that old, right, it was still in place. It will stay in place as long as OCS does not receive an update. Both parties can always agree to an extension or to renegotiate before the agreement term has run out. Now, the service territory is the first thing that I remember in Oregon. I remember thinking, oh, this is really important because we have several reservations where people are not in one area of the state. And it didn't make sense to me that those people should have to drive to the tribal office, which was clear across the state, in order to get a LIHEAP benefit. And so this is why a negotiation with your state can be really helpful, because you can identify the boundaries of your reservation or trust land. You can identify those places outside that may have a significant tribal presence, including zip codes and cities or counties, but most importantly, you define who serves them. So if a person is X miles away from the base, or it's geographically inaccessible to get back to the tribe, can the state serve them? And that's what this tribal agreement would negotiate. Defining households served by tribe, this is really up to the tribe. But it's important to lay out in the document who is the state going to serve and who is the tribe going to serve. And so this could be all households regardless of race. Many of you have different guidelines for who your tribal funding can serve, including there's some examples here: American Indian, Alaska Native, enrolled tribal member, or non-enrolled tribal members, or their family members. This is a tough one. The state and the tribe are responsible for avoiding duplication of benefits. If I'm a tribal member and I walk into a tribal office, I should not be able to go into a state and get an additional benefit, and vice versa. So state tribal agreements should establish how you're going to avoid this. Now, there's different ways to do this, and I don't know if my friends are here from yesterday, but they were looking in the audience at me like, how are we going to do this? Because many states and tribes don't share data systems, and many don't want to, right? And I think that's an important point to make. So there are a few different ways to do this. There can be a database with view-only rights, right? So a state or a tribe could have access to a module of a state system where they could just go in and see who has been served and input who has been served, so that everyone is sharing that information. Some tribes and states just pick up the phone. Has this person been helped yet? Yes, no, and that's how it works. Their fax is another. How many of you do that? Do any of you still fax? Yeah, covered wagon guy over here. So the idea, this doesn't have to be highly technological. That being said, it becomes more challenging when it's manual, right? You don't want to have to pick up the phone for every single person that you serve. So how are you going to do this? Other factors to consider. I'm going to seek a way to say this. When negotiating a state-tribe agreement, especially when you're talking about money, it is very important for tribes to maintain their philosophical belief, culture, values within their agreement. So there are states that say, if we give you more money, we want your benefits to look more like ours, right? This is a challenge. This is where negotiation comes in, but it's a really important piece of the tribal agreement, is understanding that even if the tribe is going to be allocated more funds, these are the things they are going to maintain, and they are going to do business the way they need to do business to best meet the needs of tribal members. And that's what this parity word, someone used a big word, parity, comparability, right? Some people want state and tribe benefits to look alike, but I'm once again going to emphasize that tribal members have different needs. We heard that clearly in our last session, or in our session this morning with Lori, and so it's important for the tribe to maintain whatever services are necessary to meet the unique needs of their tribal members, regardless of what else is negotiated in the contract. Oh, yeah. That's a closed eye one, just a warning. The availability and cost of fuel on the reservation will play into this. So, for example, if one of the things that we hear in some states is that they've negotiated that when the tribe runs out of money, the state will provide tribal members benefits after that. Do any of you have that worked out in your state? Washington. Who's the one in the back? Washington's just awesome. When you're thinking about that, it's important to look at the availability and cost of fuel on the reservation, right? Because If it's very expensive fuel on the reservation, the benefits are going to go much quicker. And so being able to think about that when you look at funding and who you're going to be serving is important. And then winter moratorium may not apply depending on what kinds of utilities. So let me take a step back here. If there's one thing I want you to hear, it is just thinking about service delivery in your state, how to best serve tribal members. States get very little money from the default allocation. This is your chance not only to get more money, but to make sure that you're working arm in arm with the state to make sure tribal members get every possible benefit they need. And this is the way to do it and the method to do it. So be looking at geographic location, what's going to happen when the tribal money runs out, who's going to serve them. And I lost track of the third thing. It's the train of thought is now a golf cart of chaos. All right, so I'm going to pass this off. Yes, go ahead.
Can you say more about what the winter moratorium may not apply?
It means that just like in many rural areas where there are meetings and co-ops, they're not required to have a moratorium in place or to not shut off people during weather. So that's because many tribal areas are in rural places, or they have munis and co-ops, or they have their own tribal energy companies. They're not required to have a moratorium in place like larger regulated utilities. Is that the right answer? Okay. Don't wait to do your tribal agreement. You can start one piece at a time, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but just talking with your state person will get that ball rolling. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to the very awesome Lori.
Well, no. So I think we're starting with the first slides are for David. Is that correct, Lori?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Hi, David. Sorry.
Okay. So David Gall is LIHEAP director in South Dakota, and he wasn't able to come today, but hopefully he can start presenting. Are you going to run his slides? David, are you hearing us?
No, I'm hearing you just fine. How about me?
Great. Go ahead.
All right, perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As David just mentioned, I'm David Gall. I am the program administrator for the South Dakota Energy Assistance Program. And today I want to talk about the South Dakota tribes and the agreement the state has with some of them. In South Dakota, there are 9 tribes. The tribes are Cheyenne River, Crow Creek, Flandreau, Lower Brule, Oglala, Rosebud, hi Lori, Sisseton, Wahpeton, Standing Rock, and Yankton. As of 2022, the tribes in South Dakota have populations ranging from 178 households in Flandreau to 4,071 households in the Oglala Sioux tribe. 2 of the tribes in South Dakota, Flandreau and Crow Creek, have never administered their own energy assistance programs. Sisseton, Wahpeton, and Lower Brule previously had their own LIHEAP programs, but stopped in 2012 and 2018 respectively. And currently there are 5 tribes that administer their own energy assistance programs: the Cheyenne River, Yankton, Rosebud, Oglala, and Standing Rock. Standing Rock also receives funding from North Dakota, so today we're going to talk about the first 4 that only receive funds through the existing agreements. So about the state tribe agreements that we have. The agreement between South Dakota and the tribes doubles the official OCS count and was last updated in 2014. The agreement also has a hold harmless clause that if the tribe's funding percentage decreased based on the updated OCS count, the previous agreement's percentage would be used. Each tribal service territory encompasses the full extent of any county that contains their tribal land and is not limited to official boundaries. The tribes serve all eligible Native American households in their service territories. South Dakota, the state, serves all other eligible residents regardless of location. Here we again see the total number of households for each tribe in 2022, as well as the total number of households that could potentially be eligible. Note that the number of eligible households is an approximation since the official tabulations from OCS have not yet been released. The last official count from OCS was released in 2014 and is based on data from 2011. You can see with the exception of the Yankton Sioux tribe, the number of eligible households hasn't changed too much. The rightmost column on the table shows the percentage of eligible households in the state each tribe had according to that 2011 count. And this table shows the fiscal year 2024 LIHEAP allocation for each tribe in the state of South Dakota. South Dakota's gross allocation was about $25 million. And you can see with the state tribe agreements in place, the tribes received just over double what the OCS default funding amount would have been. And pointing out Oglala Sioux tribe, as a result of the agreement, they received an increased amount of about $760,000 over what the original would have been. And with that, I can turn it over to Lori. Good afternoon.
Before Lori starts, Nisha handed out a copy of Rosebud Sioux's state tribe agreement. Did everyone get that? Everyone who wants it? Yeah, raise your hand if you didn't get it and you want it.
Can we ask David? David, do you know why South Dakota and the tribes in South Dakota agreed to an amount that's approximately twice the default value? I know that you weren't there at the time. I was just, I'm the only old person who was around when those first developed. But do you have any ideas about what?
I don't, David. I was in junior high I was in elementary school at the time, but in the mid 80s, they determined, that, and I think Peter addressed this a bit, that, the tribes are well known to be undercounted in the census. So that's, as far as where the doubling comes from, I really don't know that for sure, but.
Okay. Well, we're gonna let Lori talk to that issue. Thank you, David.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello? So I think the reason why the double the count was because we are undercounted in the Census Bureau. And I worked for the Census Bureau in 2009, and we were trying to work with all the tribes. And at that time, we were going to do the update enumerate, which meant that we were going to go individually to the households and try to get each of the individuals that were living inside the household, and it still wasn't very successful. Because of the intergenerational mistrust that I talked about this morning, a lot of the individuals were unwilling to tell of all the people that lived in the home. And I have a little side, because back when they were taking our children to be sent to boarding schools and down in Carlisle, a lot of our relatives were hidden in plain sight, because at that time, when I say plain sight, it's because they never really let you know who you were related to, because they were asking specifically for the Itranchas and the medicine men's children and relatives, because they were going to take them and educate them. So they hid some of our relatives in plain sight, saying that they weren't related to them, or even identified that they were related to. So let me begin if you guys don't have any questions. This is fairly new to me too. Like I said, I was the director in 2018, but our reservation, we are in South Dakota. This is our state. And the reservation that we are in is in the teal color. That's the Rosebud Reservation. And that's the 4 counties that our state tribal agreement covers. And I think you guys all have a copy of our state tribal agreement. And the geographic boundaries, we assist all Native American who identify as Native American. We assist all families that identify as Native American in the Gregory, Millette, Tripp, and Todd counties.
Some live on reservation lands because, like in Tripp County, we have two communities. One is North Ideal and South Ideal, but we also have Winter Proper. And we have some tribal members that live in Winter Proper, and those are we also help them that reside off the reservation, but within our boundaries. When they apply for the LIHEAP in Rosebud, we ask for a tribal ID, and I think we only have like several, one from the Ogallala tribe, the Blackfeet tribe. I don't know if we had one from Menominee and Yankton. They reside within our service area, and we assist them as if they are a tribal member. So we help any recognized tribal member within our service area that are federally recognized in the 574 tribes of the United States. The funding, we receive a percentage of the state's gross allotment. It is based upon the doubling of the households on the reservation. And back in 2014, they had determined there was 2,600, and they doubled that to 4.6, which would have been, they give us 4.7 of the state's allocation. We usually go by the 150% of the income poverty guideline when we are certifying LIHEAP individuals. Do you guys have any questions yet?
So one of our questions when we're looking at this is, do we use a regular contract? Do we use an MOU, or do we do a government-to-government contract? Because they're all separate and different in our state.
So how many tribes do you have in your, you said you dealt with
29.
And I was going to ask, are they a consortium? Are they smaller? What state are you from?
Washington. So we have Stowe, which is the small tribe in Washington, and I believe there's 5. And then we have Steepo, which is the South Puget Sound. Oh, I lost it. And then the rest of them are there. We have 3 that do not contract and do not serve. That's Puyallup, Tulalip, and I want to say Upper Skagit, but I'm not 100%.
And the Lumbee tribe is out in that area.
Yes, the Lumbee tribe is there. They do serve. They're a wonderful partner. They're amazing.
And they're a bigger tribe, yeah.
Yeah. We were just trying to figure out what would be the best approach and what would be more.
I was thinking, what would I do if I had 29 tribes? Because we have 9 and we only have 4 in the state of South Dakota that do a tribal state agreement.
Pull your hair out.
I think that with some of the smaller tribes, I would do a consortium. And then see if the bigger tribes would do the consortium or take them underneath their wing. And then you do the tribal state agreement with them, agreeing that this is how they're going to be served. But so yeah, we don't have a MOU, and we are sovereign nations, but we do the tribal state agreement, and then I didn't even know one existed. Like I said, in 2018, it wasn't until we had the Region 4 meeting that David and I were talking, and then I started hearing about the state tribal agreement. We didn't even have one in the office. So he looked it up, and I think we only had 2, and you can use the same number in perpetuity. And at that time, the amount that has been given us, it seems to be serving our purposes, yet post-COVID, we've seen an increase in the need and a decrease in our funding. So in order for us to have a cooling season, our tribe assists us with half of what the state gives us, and we do April 1 through September 30th for 0-income families that have no income at all, and I think there are 473 families. And then we help elders 60 and over with an income of $21,000 or less, and I think we have 263 families of elders. So our tribe gives us 500,000 to work that program. So we do have some federal monies that help us with like crisis payments that we try to budget out through the last 6 months. But I am working on trying to increase that amount so that we can continue a cooling season as well, because in January we had sub-zero weather, and that had increased. Like I think we had 24 degrees below zero, but the wind chill factor is actually 44 degrees below. Our heat, we've already had 90-degree weather, and it would dip real low again. So we have that fluctuation of weather that I'm concerned about this coming summer. So in part of the agreement is avoiding duplication of services. And how we do that is we do emails. I've identified two of my staff, Sharon and Miranda. They get the emails from the state counterpart saying, this individual has applied, are they receiving tribal LIHEAP? Or if they go to the state office, they'll say, have you tried tribal LIHEAP first? Unless they have a spouse that is Caucasian or of another, then they can apply for state LIHEAP within those 4 service areas that we have. So we do a lot of communication. We do the snail mail. They'll send us a list of individuals that they're helping, and then we just keep that on file, and then they'll call us later and verify, or we'll call them and verify. We have had to go out and touch base with some families because we've had lineal descent, which we've not had before in our tribe. And they just have to prove 3 generations back that they had a grandparents that has some type of native blood. I hate that pedigree. Don't get me wrong. I hate that we have to prove our pedigree. We are the only ethnic group that has to do that. And I just hate that. But anyway, so we've had people, especially on the eastern part of our reservations, that are lineal descents that will claim native and get LIHEAP help. And then, do you remember the one woman? She said she lived on the half of the trailer, so she was getting LIHEAP from the tribe. And the other half of the trailer, we didn't catch it because he was Caucasian and he was getting state LIHEAP. So one was getting electricity and the other was getting propane. And it just happened to be she was calling on a brother who needed wood, and we had to go out and check, and then she got really upset with us. But we're really big on trying to make sure that people aren't fraudulent with us, because that has happened quite a bit too, and we've caught a lot of that. So that's how we identify, is we've built relationships. We've had DSS supervisors come to our office and meet with us, and then we've also gone to their offices. Someone had mentioned this morning, all I have to do is get a call in, and we're able to do that as well with our vendors. We just call them, tell them, can you turn this person on, or can you get this person? We will be paying you, and we usually try to do the payment the very next day. With our crisis, we try to do get the assistance like that day or within the next 24 hours, dependent on the weather, if how many children they have in the home, and then the elders. So that's how we exchange services. We don't have any access to their electronic systems, and we don't even have an electronic system. We still do the Excel spreadsheet for data. The communication and building in relationships going beyond the agreement. I am forever grateful. David, are you still on the line? Must have got off. But
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. I am very grateful for the region meeting that we had in Denver, because I would have not known that David Gall existed unless probably if I had to some type of emergency. Vicki Pretlow in DC was amazing. David had come up and introduced himself, and we sat and we talked and we picked each other's brain, and none of my questions were stupid. Thank you, David. He'd been very helpful. I can call him I've been to his office. He's been invited to mine, and he's going to be, I don't know when we can make that happen. They're moving, I guess, this month. But you have to go beyond the, here's the email, here's the letter, here's the phone. Meeting the in person as if you're meeting a friend for the first time. So I am really thankful that David had come, introduced himself, sought me out during that meeting. I was new. I would have never realized we had all of this information accessible to us at the state level. He's very open to hearing my thoughts about the state tribal agreement, because one of my goals is to actually get away from taking from our tribe the $500,000 to run our cooling system, because that $500,000 is taking from tribal programs, tribal employees, because that's how they get paid. So if we can maneuver or use some numbers where we can double what we've shown up here, that would help us get more funding so that we can not have to turn away 500 families for the cooling season.
So Peter said earlier that we could use fixed amounts and percentages. Does it have to be either or could it be both? Like in that example, they would be running at their 4.6, but could they also, if the state and the tribe agree, have additional $500,000 that just automatically goes to the tribal cooling? It was written in the agreement. It was just a thought.
No, and I've been kind of thinking along the same lines, but what I think caught my attention too is that we have to show numbers. We have to show proof that we do need this increased amount, because I was talking to David last October and told him in a 3-bedroom ranch style type house, we had 24 individuals living in there in a 3-bedroom. And years back, I had asked Vicki, I said, with the SNAP benefits, you can have 3 family units living in the house, and they can each get their own SNAP benefit with just a letter stating that they eat separately and they keep their food separately. I asked if we could use that type of philosophy in LIHEAP. If we have 3 families living within one household, is there any way we can assist each family with a percentage to try to get more money in there to help them with a higher light bill? That didn't work because it doesn't count for the amount of income that is going into the home. Each family having their own income, which would take them over the 150%. But we do have generations, like up to 3 generations living in houses because of our lack of housing. SWA is one of our biggest housing units, and they have, I don't know, how many boarded up in our community? Maybe 30? 27 housing units boarded up in the St. Francis community where I'm from, and we have probably about 2,100 people living in St. Francis. So that we can't count those housing units. And the reason they're boarded, I know you're looking, is because they're meth infested and they're not livable. And to renovate them, it costs quite a bit of money. In a previous life, I was the youth and family specialist for our meth initiative, and we brought down Sisseton, Wahpeton, where we were testing the housing, getting them clean, wanting to give them a clean bill of health, and then letting the people move in there and saying, at this point forward, you are now responsible for any renovations. Well, that didn't happen. People were getting evicted. They started taking it down the wrong road, and we still have our housing units that are boarded up. We've had several grandparents that tested positive for meth just living in those household units, because meth infests any type of wood, furniture. So we've had that problem. So I've been thinking about different ways. I've asked David about our tribal numbers because of lineal descent. I believe we went up to 35,000 some odd hundred. We have 18,000, 19,000 adults over the age of 18 that lives on the reservation, but that still doesn't help us. They're really generous with giving us the 2.7%, but I need to document or show that we can use a little bit of more money for the cooling season. Again, going back to just the methods of communication, reaching out, him being amenable, calling me back. It sounds one-sided, huh, David? Because I call him. But
No, not at all.
but I feel we have a really good working relationship, and I just appreciate that region meeting that we had. Otherwise, I would have not known. So it is really important that you know that you have a state counterpart. It's important that you try to meet them and get to know them, and then talk about your state tribal agreements. The advantages of being served by the tribe and not the state. One is, again, the generational mistrust because they will not come in. We have some families that will not, we've seen an increase in families that we have not seen before. We know which one are our problem children, so we know which staff to send out to get the information, to assist them, to give them rides, to sit with them, take pictures. It's building that relationship and them also knowing, because they'll ask you, well, which family do you come from? Who's your mom? Oh yeah, I know Bonnie. Okay, and then they'll sit down and they'll start telling you and they'll talk to you. But that also, we also collaborate with our elder protection, which Sharon, my intake specialist, has been a big advocate, even as she sat on the council, because we have a lot of our adult children who financially abuse our elders. They'll take their cards. You know, they'll say, Mom, I need bread. And this is what one told me. Gave her the pin. She went out, brought the card back. She went to go get something. Her account was drained. Or what we're finding too in the state, when they refer tribal members to state protected payees, they're not helping our tribal members. So we then refer them to our protected payee, hoping that they'll follow up and have them take over as a protected payee. And that lends to us having a better understanding of our community. So I know which communities, like Miranda, she always says my peeps, because there's an elder woman in our Swift Bear community who just love her. She can go and they just run around and get the applications and they get the help they need and they answer the questions, and she's built that relationship. Whereas if we have to go to like Antelope, which is one of our bigger ones, Sharon or I will go. We go to the bigger communities because they're the ones that are louder, demanding, feel they're entitled. And so we have to answer those questions for them. Which lends to we are suited to identify the needs, the values, which allow us to optimize our outreach. We have a lot more single male households that have applied and are very appreciative, which allows us to deliver our services in a better, friendlier manner, because we do the outreach. We go out into the communities. We talk to the people. We go and search out our problem children. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
So it sounds like you serve any household, regardless of the tribal membership of the adults in the home. We have tribes that we serve that may have the adults can get served from either of the tribes in the area if they are a member of that tribe. And it doesn't matter if other household members are not members of that tribe. So if we have a couple that is one from one tribe and one from the other tribe, and they are both eligible for services from either, how do we prevent the crossing of the duplicate tribe by tribe And how can us as state community action agencies assist with that?
Well, like ROC, we have ROC here. So they assist some of our tribal members with like assistance to help with the electricity, so if we pay our portion and they're still in need, ROC will help them and they'll let us know, or we actually refer them. So if we have a person, and we have a person from the Ogallala tribe and the Rosebud tribe living on the Rosebud reservation, because our service agreement says we do the 4 counties on the Rosebud, and the Ogallala has their own counties, we serve them here, but they won't serve them with the Ogallala tribe. I don't think we've ever had a Native family try to get 2 services, but our tribal agreements are really clear on the boundaries of who we will serve. So we serve any tribal member that's enrolled in a federally recognized tribe. So if we do have a Blackfeet living in our Grass Mountain community, she will get serviced with us, but will get service from Wyoming. But we do have people calling from other states asking for our help, and we refer them to their local LIHEAP offices as a start, their DSS. But the communication is key. If you have any question, pick up the phone and call.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're up.
Hey.
That's greetings and Nungam to do the indigenous language of the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands. My name is Jacob Timmons. I'm a division administrator for the Employment Training and Related Services Division in Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association. We're a nonprofit tribal consortium of 13 federally recognized tribes. I'll be presenting a little bit of information on Alaska in general, and just so everyone knows, I'm presenting from the perspective of APIA and don't speak for any of the other tribal organizations there. So Alaska's got 13 tribes that are running their own LIHEAP programs. 7 are with individual tribes and 6 with tribal consortiums. 8 are serving both native and non-native households, and 5 serve native households alone. So there's quite a bit of difference in the way that our tribal organizations run our programs and the best way to benefit our tribal citizens. So Alaska's has a comparable benefit matrix. So our benefit matrix has a multiplicative point system that a number of our organizations utilize. It takes into account things like community points, which are related to the cost of heating in a community, dwelling types, which is the household size. So it's more expensive to heat a 3-bedroom household than a 1-bedroom, and so there's a point allocated for that, as well as how a household's income relates to the HHS poverty guidelines, as well as heating type points. We also take into account priority points. And at one point, we shared data with the state. And so like Lori here, when I started with APIA in 2016, I had no idea there was a state tribal agreement at all. And it wasn't until more recently that we shared that we received that information. And after looking at that, we were able to sort of reverse engineer where that came from, how we came up with the allocation, and it does relate back to these points that we shared with the state. And this created a created a more equitable way, I would say, of allocating funds, because it did take into consideration all those different pieces, that it is more expensive to heat houses in our rural areas than it is in urban areas. So we were allocated higher amount of funding because of that. Alaska is very large. We can see the overlay of Alaska on top of the contiguous U.S. And because of that, we have a lot of different ways to serve our people and a lot of different organizations that are doing so. So like I was mentioning, some of the benefits of allocating based on a point system is that funding's then weighted towards those remote rural areas where the cost of heating is much higher. With good coordination, it also allows for funding those neediest households that have the lowest amount of income, which many times do reside in our native communities. And it also allows for collaboration and adjusting the funding if we're in good contact with the state of Alaska and can coordinate on our state tribal agreements. We can then serve those households if we have a change. For example, in my region, a number of the fish processing plants are pulling out, and our fishermen won't have a place to sell their fish when they do commercial fishing. So we're going to have a number of additional households that would usually have good income coming in and wouldn't be eligible for LIHEAP are going to now be eligible since they don't have any income coming in from their jobs. So it also encourages having more outreach and really engaging with communities to get more households to apply because it then allows us to adjust our allocations to then better serve those and to stretch. And instead of having to stretch the same dollar amount with the same allocation percent each year, even if we do engage really well and get more households to apply with our program. Here's some statistics on Alaska Native households living in poverty compared with all households in Alaska. And the purpose of this is to show that even though there's 31% of low-income households in Alaska have at least one Alaska Native or American Indian member in the house, that 41% of, we receive 41% of Alaska's allocation. And that's due to the really high cost of heating in our tribal areas. And I believe that the amount of funding received could even be higher than that. Some of the costs of living is just much, much higher than in the urban centers of Anchorage, which accounts for most of the population. So now talking about API specific and how we have our state tribal agreement set up. We serve 10 communities in the very remote Aleutian and Pribilof Islands region of Alaska. No roads connect these islands, of course, and airfare is very expensive. Cost of living is very expensive, and so we have a challenge at our hands here to serve our tribal members. We have a snapshot here in the bottom that's from our actual state tribal agreement. You can see we've got some handwritten sections crossed out. This hasn't been revisited since probably 2014 and demonstrates that we do have some work on our hands to update these. I would encourage all of our tribes, if you don't know what your state tribal agreement looks like, to request that from your state or from your federal partner. Because they do exist, and they're very important for your, especially for your funding allocation and your service area. Oh, good. Okay. Oh, here we go. We got some highlighted of our communities served. You see a few are crossed out. Some of them are crossed out because those communities are no longer inhabited after the forceful relocation of people from the Aleutian Islands during World War II at the hands of the U.S. government. And one, Dutch Harbor, we consider the same community as Unalaska. And so we serve it as one community rather than two separate ones. We also describe whether we serve native or non-native households. API has made the decision to serve only native households. And in our operating procedures, we further define that as any household that has at least one Alaska Native or American Indian resident in the household, including children. So even one child in the household will serve that as a native household. And we document this with a copy of a tribal card, tribal enrollment letter, or a CIB. One of the reasons we only serve Native households is the indirect cost or the administrative cost cap that DHHS has on our program, and we have to supplement our administrative costs with discretionary funds from our tribal organization. And because of that, serving non-Native households with our own tribal discretionary funds is not necessarily a priority for our organization at this time. Another section in here, and I was interested to hear that Washington will serve those Native households if they've run out of funding. We have a stipulation in our state tribal agreement that we are not allowed to refer households over if we run out of funding. So it's interesting to see that, and it's always a learning opportunity at conferences like this. It's great for us all to come together and learn from each other that the way things aren't necessarily the way things have to be. And so I'd really encourage everyone to, put your heads together and come up with, these state tribal agreements that really can best serve our neediest and most vulnerable populations, especially those underserved in tribal communities. I'm going to breeze over comparable benefits. We don't have a whole lot of that in my service area anyways, and I believe Lori covered that very well already. We are funded at 1.06% of Alaska's block grant. And similar to Lori's, that effectively doubles our dollar amount per household. And rather than looking at it from a perspective of underrepresentation in census data, we look at it as our cost of heating is double that of our urban counterparts. And so that's where our higher rate of funding comes in play. Another interesting part of our state tribal agreement is a condition that we provide an annual LIHEAP summary report. While it is in our agreement, and we used to do this maybe 5 years ago, we haven't had a request for this report come for quite some time from the state of Alaska. I believe this was previously used to determine funding allocations, which would be a great way to compare data and to especially if all of our tribes came together and submitted our data together, it would really give a good picture of the state as a whole, the cost disparities between tribal organizations and urban areas, and would allow for a more realistic and equitable distribution of funding that could almost in real time account for changes in population and cost of living and heating costs, and increased poverty levels in our communities, especially with changes in the economic viability of industries such as fishing or other activities. And I take any questions, or I can pass it over to Pam if we're running low on time. We're good? Any questions? I will pass it over to Pam.
Hello. My name is Pamela Murphy, and I work with the Bristol Bay Native Association in Dillingham. Dillingham, or BBNA, serves the Bristol Bay region. We kind of go from the top, and then Jacob picks up right here where we kind of fall off. Our service area is over 40,000 square miles. Nothing's connected by roads. You have to fly to every community. Which is a challenge for us. We're verifying who lives in the household. Like you said, the trailer, that's a little bit harder for us because we have to get a plane ticket and fly out to the communities and verify that. BBNA serves 31 tribal communities. However, only 30 of those communities have agreed to let us serve their LIHEAP. Perryville opted out, and they actually serve their own community with their LIHEAP dollars. We serve, so the thing that's different about APIA and BBNA is we serve all the households in our region, native or non-native. They apply through us, and we take care of their LIHEAP application. How we avoid duplication of service is through communication with the state. We talk to them. If we get an application that maybe they're new to the region, we would verify with the state first to make sure they haven't been served in another region or with another entity, just to make sure they haven't been served. Or they do the same thing with us. If they have somebody new that might have moved out of our region, they'll verify with us first and make sure we haven't served them. We access their database. If we need to know who's in a household, we can verify with maybe their food stamps or maybe their DOL, stuff like that, income, who's in the household. That makes it nice for us if we need to know something. The state allows us access to those databases. And then pretty much like Lori, and actually this is a funny story. Last year was my first time ever coming to this conference, and Jacob called me and said, "Hey, I'm not going to make it. Can you present?" And I said, "Yeah, no problem." And David gets a hold of me and says, "Well, what does your state MOA say?" I was like, "I don't know. I've never seen that." I didn't even know it existed. And so like Lori, I went and opened up some file cabinets, and digging through the back of it, I found it was from 1994. Yeah, just a piece of paper in the back that said what our agreement with the state was, because I didn't know it existed. So coming to these types of things and hearing how people do this stuff, or finding out that we didn't know either, we had to find this information, I think is useful, because how do you know if it exists? I didn't even know. So any questions about BB&A service area, region, or LIHEAP program? Oh, I have another slide. Hold on. Which button do I push?
Who pays for your plane trips?
Yeah. Because we also run a 477 program, we sometimes try to, so we'll go out to communities and we'll offer multiple things. LIHEAP will go with us, but we'll also talk about higher ed, ABT, employment and training, all of the other services that we offer, so we can kind of go out as a group and talk about. So one of the things, and I don't know if it's okay to talk about it, but we'd like to tie LIHEAP into our 477 program. And then we have one application for all of our services right now. The only one that doesn't fit is LIHEAP. So that will also come in. So you'll fill out one application and we'll determine all of the services that you're eligible for at one time.
People know the 477 program?
No. Isn't that where all federal funds?
Yes. Yep. 102,477. So the law basically says is that all of our funding comes down. It goes into one pool of money. We determine how to best spend those dollars. And then when we report back, we spend it all. It's gone. It's pretty fancy. Okay. I don't know how to change this.
The arrow.
Okay. I missed that. Okay. Oh, yeah. So our total agreement with the state is we get 5.76% of their total LIHEAP block grant. We do receive a higher allocation than APIA, but wait. Oh yes, so we have more households, but we also, because we serve native and non-native, we have more eligible households in our region. And like Jacob said, I had mentioned the cost of electric and fuel. That's a big thing for us when we talk about serving our area. I want to say our electricity right now is 76 cents per kilowatt hour. I think in Anchorage it's 22 cents per kilowatt hour, 76 cents per kilowatt hour. Yes. And fuel right now is $6.70 a gallon. Yep. And one of the things too that often happens in our area, which is, so it's important for folks to keep up with their bill and pay them in our region, because all of our fuel is bought in bulk and shipped out to our communities. Once it freezes up, you can't get fuel out there anymore. Now you have to, I think Iliamna, one of our communities down the chain, they ran out of fuel, and so they had to hire a crop duster plane to fill up the wings with fuel and fly it out to their community over and over and over. Now we're talking, now it's not $6.70 a gallon, now it's $20 a gallon. Yeah. So it's important for them to pay their bills. It's important that our utilities operate, because they have to have the money to buy that fuel in bulk before everything freezes up. We were talking about the LIHEAP program, and we had to say kind of a funny thing, because they were like, well, they don't, because, some households don't have running water. That's okay. It's just kind of how it is. And they were saying, well, you could buy them crates of water bottles and send it out to their communities. And I said, well, We have multi-generational homes, 3 or 4 generations living in one home. Where are they going to store this? Outside? Are they drink their ice? I was like, we can't do that. It doesn't work for us. So a lot of things that work for other communities don't always necessarily work for us. And that includes LIHEAP and other programs that we run too. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Jesse, can you hear us?
Yeah, and can everyone hear me? I'll do my best to not shout, but
Go ahead and shout.
And really, yeah, thank you to everyone, and to Pamela and Jacob for presenting. My name is Jesse Parr. I'm with the Division of Public Assistance within the Department of Health for the state of Alaska, and again, I feel like everyone in the previous presentations has discussed some of the challenges with the different methodologies and things like that. And I've been back with our Division of Public Assistance for almost a year. And so really, everything was fairly well gathered for me prior to coming on. But we're actively trying to wrap up our current heating assistance season. We've really had a number of backlogs and challenges with application processing, and so really trying to work with our tribal partners has been crucial. And as Jacob previously showed, and I'm kind of demonstrating, Alaska is a big state. We are twice the size of Texas and 3 times the size at low tide. Within Alaska, I believe there are 229 federally recognized tribes. Alaska is also organized into 13 regions. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act from 1972, which is older than me, really created 12 for-profit tribal corporations. And the only area that did not elect to create a tribal corporation was in Metlakatla. And Metlakatla is in the southern tip of southeastern Alaska, and it is the only reservation within Alaska. And so we have a little bit of really a different setup than the continental United States, or I can't say contiguous, but really we have heterogeneous populations throughout. And so we really are partnering and coordinating on potentially on a case-by-case basis for our mixed households and things like that. And so it is really important that we partner. As was previously mentioned, Alaska has always gone with more of the comparability between tribal and state programs. For the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, which I also help to administer, there's federal and state law that has comparability requirements, and a lot of the methodology that's been done in LIHEAP has been really trying to replicate that. Really, for federal TANF funding, everything was based off of the 1994 AFDC caseload. I apologize. AFDC is an acronym for the Aid to Families with Dependent Children program. I was not quite in high school yet. 94 was a while ago, but we do still have that historic data, and really I know that the different MOAs with tribal organizations for LIHEAP have been amended a few times over the years, but again, as we spoke to earlier, there's varying costs of both fuel and the transportation. As Pamela was saying, it's a big lift to get the actual needed heating source to that community. And so we've always tried to really provide the most accurate and detailed information to whichever tribal organization, and then to also acknowledge where there might be gaps in services. Alaska has always used what it refers to as fee agents. Fee agents is a term that comes from food stamps. Really, we have a federal regulation that is 44 years old that allows us to pay people to conduct interviews and accept application and supporting documentation where we don't have public assistance offices. And we've we've tried to really allow that for all of our public assistance programs, whether it's Medicaid, LIHEAP, TANF, et cetera. And so that's where a lot of that outreach comes out, or comes from. In Alaska, we definitely have some unique opportunities and challenges. Again, kind of just getting to our population size and how things are spread out. But in looking at this map, it's difficult to show where actual people are. But the vast majority of Alaska's population is within the Cook Inlet region and the Doyon region. Fairbanks is Alaska's second largest city. The Cook Inlet region has Anchorage, which is the only city in Alaska that's not considered rural. I think the federal definition of rural is under 50,000 or micrometropolitan. But again, we have a road system that connects kind of the south central to northern or interior part of Alaska up to Fairbanks and extending north. But there's definitely challenges. I'm from Juneau, which I've always referred to as the capital village, and our population has really been around 30,000 my entire life. And so again, the traditional kind of undercount that many people spoke to earlier is something that we're aware of. My fiance and both my children are Alaska Native, and they're enrolled in federally recognized tribes. So there's, we've always done the head of household is the person who submits the application. And so in my family, if I was to submit the application, the staff person from the state might double check with Clinton Heights Regional Housing to ensure that there was no application submitted by my fiance that includes it. And so we've kind of done things like that. But yeah, it's definitely a big state, and again, it has a number of challenges, but also opportunities to coordinate. I feel like I've rambled on for a little while. Does anyone have any detailed questions I can help with?
Jesse, do you want to cover what's on this slide?
Yeah, and again, I've been back for almost a year with the Division of Public Assistance. I've never kept a job for 3 years, so it's hard for me to figure out what's happening at any given time. But again, I've been doing my best with both LIHEAP and TANF to really, to communicate on a monthly basis, if not more, and then really just to be responsive to any inquiries. Again, historically, I'm not sure exactly how long the Town Chiefs Conference has administered LIHEAP, but Fairbanks is usually considered the second largest community in Alaska. Fairbanks itself is right around a population of 30,000, but because of how that's much smaller than the actual population in the area or the surrounding population that comes into Fairbanks for shopping and potentially fuel, et cetera. I would say it's closer to 100,000 is the more realistic number. My grandfather was a legislator from up there, and he chose Fairbanks back in, I want to say right around statehood, to use his GI Bill after retiring from the military. My father never forgave him. My dad moved all the way south of Juneau as the black sheep, but we're really looking to expand TCC's service population to include Native Alaskans or American Indians residing in Fairbanks. Fairbanks was historically founded by someone who got stuck on the river. I can't remember if it's the Tanana River or the Chena River, but I'll make sure to ask my grandma when we head up there in the next couple of weeks. And also, Jacob and APIA have expressed interest in really looking at the other communities within their service area, or potentially expanding to serve all families living in the Aleutian Islands. So those are kind of some of the immediate things. And then the Kodiak Area Native Association had previously administered LIHEAP in their region, and they're interested in re-implementing or reestablishing their program. We've also seen a few different inquiries from Queric in the Bering Straits area, Manilic in in the Kotzebue or Northwest Arctic Native Association. And so they've done some site visits to other programs, or we're interested in seeing how we can help. The other kind of big area where we've historically kind of kept programming separate, but we're also looking to expand the use of TANF, or what we refer to as our Native Family Assistance Program grants, to really try to ensure that all those grant funds are used and that we keep families warm. I know for many people in the audience, they're probably familiar with the different reporting requirements for households with a child under the age of 6. And in Alaska, we've started really looking at households with a child under the age of 19 to try to really see where we can use more TANF to support those payments. For TANF, a LIHEAP payment has always been an allowable legal payment. We just have always had plenty of LIHEAP funding, and with certain different federal changes for TANF, we're looking at expanding our use of TANF funding in LIHEAP. That's kind of where we're at there, and yeah.
Okay, so any questions for the Alaska crowd before we wrap up? It's been a long day, right? Go ahead.
When we were doing some research on this, Nisha found that there were 6,000 individuals who were Alaska Natives living in the Fairbanks area. And they talked about expanding TCC service area to include that. Are they served by the state now? And if so, what are the advantages of them being served by the tribe? Sort of things that Lori talked about, or are there other things as well?
Jesse, you want to answer that? Or you want me to answer that?
I heard, what are the advantages of being served by the tribe, and I'll just give a overly transparent response, and really the immediate, yeah, they're quicker. Right now we're still just experiencing a backlog in application processing. But again, many tribal members would prefer to go to the Tana Chiefs Conference rather than come to our state office. And so that's my quick response is really, and we've worked on a weekly basis with TCC to try to expedite any applications we can. And again, I've been working with them to try to use more of their state TANF grant to serve families with a dependent child in their home. And then we've been pulling those state applications out of our queue if they're able to serve the family.
Hi, everybody. I'm Crystal Lapp. I'm the Energy Assistance Coordinator for Tana Chiefs Conference. And if you saw that map, that big brown area that said join on, that's me. And so right now I serve 42 tribal nations. We are a tribal consortium. We also serve primarily in most areas Native and non-Native. Yep. So we serve primarily Native and non-Native. However, our MOA is a little old. And that's what we're doing, is working on like updating it because it can be really confusing. I serve a large area. It's the size of the state of Texas. And we don't want to bounce people back and forth through the state. Most people live rurally. They have lack of access to technology and sometimes even phone. So just making it to where it's easier for people to get services is what we're working on. And then I'll say another thing about the Fairbanks area. So Fairbanks area there's tribes from all over the world there. We're not just TCC region. So we don't just serve our tribes. And this goes for within our villages as well. If you're from Indian country and you come up and live in one of our villages, we're going to help you out. So the reason why we're looking at expanding to Fairbanks is because our TCC building is kind of like your DPA office. They already come to us And then right now what happens is we have to turn them around and send them to the state. So we're just trying to streamline it for our people.
So I think that's what she was just talking about is exactly what the major message here is. The importance of the state and tribal agreement is it sets clear expectations, assures all low-income households have access to meaningful services, but it allows for tailored approaches to address unique needs of each tribe and each person within a tribal area. So the key is don't wait for the other party to initiate the process. Sometimes the states reach out to tribes, other times tribe reach out to state. There's no official protocol. OCS will accept whatever you all come up with. So if you see a way to improve what's going on, please reach out to your state program manager and let's make it work. And you don't have to cover you don't have to completely rewrite so you saw Jacob's agreement. They crossed out with pen certain pieces of information and wrote in something new. That's okay. Whatever you came up with in terms of an agreement, as long as it works for you and works for the state, it works. So make it happen. You don't have to hire expensive lawyers. So doing something is better than doing nothing. Please do that. So last thing for today is that NEADA is, you want to cover this? So come on up. This is Cassandra Lovejoy from NEADA. And last year, Lori and Pamela said, it's great that the states have this listserv. What about us? And so NEADA offered to come up with a tribal listserv, and Cass will describe it.
So if you have been paying attention to your work email and you're the designated representative for a tribe, according to HHS on their website, you should have gotten an email from me earlier today inviting you to the NEADA tribal listserv. And like David said, it is identical to our state listserv, which is longstanding and is an opportunity for tribes to talk directly to one another, share best practices, ask questions. You know, we get questions from the state on the state listserv all the time about, hey, I'm thinking about changing my program, or hey, the household came in with this situation that I've never seen before. Has anybody done this? And do you know how to serve this? You know, how do you serve this household in your state? And so the way that we've designed it, it is, again, exactly the same way we did the state one. So it is only representatives of LIHEAP tribal offices. There's nobody else on it except for NEADA moderators and staff just to keep it going. So that means there's no OCS staff on it. There's no states on it. It's just the tribes to talk to one another. And hopefully you'll get used to it a little bit, take ownership of it. I think that this came up over and over the course of the conversation that, oh, I didn't even know where my state tribe agreement was, or I didn't even know I had one. And, it takes figuring out that NEUAC exists and coming to this meeting and going, oh, that's something I need. And so now we want to get, the next group of people who've never attended this group or haven't done it in 30 years and don't know that they have a state tribe agreement to start to get that information. And so we're hoping that you'll be able to change it, and we'll improve all of the LIHEAP programs around the country.
So maybe Brian will speak to this, but for better or worse, states don't always, they love all their OCS, people from OCS. Right? They love it. But they don't always want to show what their questions are until they feel confident that they know what the options are and what the alternatives. So they are happy to have a private conversation among states about what's possible, what's been approved, what's not been approved. And this is your opportunity to have a private conversation among tribes. At some point, maybe we'll have a combined state tribal listserv where people are where a tribe is comfortable hearing from the states and the states are comfortable hearing from the tribes. Right now, this is states have a listserv where they can ask each other questions. Now tribes have a listserv where they can ask each other questions. And it has been very, very effective for the states. It's all the time. I mean, there's constant communication on it. And hopefully you all will also have constant communication, share information among the tribes, and you guys can, then help to establish more of a community.
Yeah.
And thank you very much to the ADA for doing this. We appreciate it. Okay. And so that's the information on it. And again, if you need to know more about it, talk to Cass. And that's the end of our session. Everybody will be, thank you very much for coming. My only moderator job is say, go into the app and fill out the evaluation for this session. NEUAC pays attention to it. And if you all say, this is a good session, we want to do more of this, then they'll do it. I think everybody will be happy to hang out for 5 minutes if you have special questions or want to talk to them about something to mention. Again, thank you, our speakers, very much.